universalism hold? What does the universe hold? That spirit of adventure, that spirit of exploration, it's fundamental to who we are as human beings. And it's fundamental to our future. I'm honored to be here in a room full of pioneers. I'm honored to be here in a room full of men and women that are devoting your time and your energy to crossing that next frontier. You know, a few months ago I took my family to see the movie Hidden Figures. I suspect many, if not most of the folks here have seen that movie. I took both my girls, Caroline and Catherine. Caroline's 10, Catherine's 7. I took my wife, Heidi, and I took my mom. Hidden Figures is an extraordinary story, wonderful story about 3 pioneering mathematicians, women, African-American women at NASA, who played a critical part in our space program. And, you know, after the movie, I sat down with my daughters. I wanted to talk with them a bit about that. And in particular, I talked with them about my mom. My mom graduated from Rice in 1956 with a degree in math.
Wow.
And she went and became a computer programmer, really at the dawn of the computer age. And if you remember the movie Hidden Figures, it begins with talking about computing the orbit of the Sputnik. Well, as it so happens, my mom, one of her first jobs was working for the Smithsonian, where she was tasked with helping compute the orbits for Sputnik. And so I was telling my daughters, I said, listen, Mimi, that's what they call my mom, is Mimi. Mimi was doing exactly that. Pioneering. She actually started in the 1950s, not the 1960s. So I was asking my mom, I said, all right, how real was that movie? How accurate was it? Anytime you see a movie, you figure Hollywood takes a few licenses. You know, what was that? How accurate was that working in science and technology in the 60s? Thought it was interesting. My mom thought it was very accurate, particularly the environment women had. It's not necessarily the most welcoming of environment for women. You had to be made of hardy material, which the women pioneers doing that were. But, you know, I commented about Mom. I said, you know, one of the things that sounded strange to a more modern ear was referring to these female mathematicians as computers. I said, you know, most of us, we think of a computer as a hunk of metal sitting on our desk. And I think it's very odd for a person to be a computer. My mom starts laughing. She says her very first job when she went to work at Shell in 1956, the title on her business card was computer. So I guess you could say I'm actually the son of a computer. But from those early days to today, there is an incredible arc of exploration that the men and women here are leading. You know, in Texas, we have a long history with the space program. From John F. Kennedy standing in Rice University in Houston and laying out a vision that we would go to the moon, to something as a Texan I take particular joy that the first word spoken on the moon was Houston. We win a lot of trivia contests with that. Houston, the eagle has landed. It's Houstonian. That makes me very happy. I'm really glad it wasn't some other city. It was Houston. And you know, you look at Texas, whether it is rocket testing in Central Texas, or spaceports in West Texas, or launch facilities in South Texas, or NASA and all the surrounding facilities at the Johnson Space Center. Texans are explorers. And I will say also, look, this is a partisan, polarized time in Washington. That's lost on nobody. D's and R's, it seems, fight like cats and dogs over just about everything. But here's a bit of good news. One of the very few exceptions concerns space. For the last several years, I've been privileged to chair the Space Subcommittee of the Senate Commerce Committee. And in the last several years, we've moved 2 major pieces of legislation through that committee into passage. In 2015, the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, which which I introduced, and we were able to get Democrats and Republicans together. Look, that wasn't easy. We were able to get the House and the Senate together. That was even harder. You know, there's an old joke in the House that House Republicans say. They say, the Democrats are our opponents, but the Senate is the enemy. For anyone who's dealt with Capitol Hill, you understand just how real that dynamic is. And it also involved navigating some of the state-by-state dynamics, some of the more parochial. You know, there are other states that seem to have some equities and some interest in space, whether it's Florida or Alabama or Maryland. As a Texan, I'm not quite sure why any of those states have equities in space, but all right, I'll take it on face value. But, you know, negotiating those so that each of the different regions is happy, we're able to pass that legislation through. Both houses of Congress, it went to the White House, and President Obama signed it. Then 2 years later, in 2017, passed the NASA Authorization Act of 2017. It's the first authorization for NASA in 7 years. 2010 was the last time we had a NASA authorization bill. Once again, we had to navigate battles between D's and R's, battles between the House and the Senate, regional battles, and yet once again we're able to bring everyone together on the same page. And that legislation, in turn, was signed by President Trump. Now listen, there are not many areas of substance on anything where you have a major piece of legislation signed by Barack Obama and another major piece of legislation signed by Donald Trump. That does not happen often. I've got both of those framed in my office, one above the other. But you know, that bipartisan commitment, the NASA authorization bill, there were a lot of important elements in there. Both that and then the Commercial Space Launch Act, it continued the regulatory moratorium on space. The last thing we want to do for exploring space is have a bunch of regulators come and muck it up. A bunch of regulators come and put barriers in your way exploring. Establishing property rights in space so that there are incentives to go and explore and develop. And by the way, I've made a prediction. I believe the first trillionaire will be made in space. I don't know how exactly, I don't know what, I don't know what discovery it will be, but my prediction is the first trillionaire on the face of the planet will be made, maybe somebody in this room. Whoever it is, by the way, if the first trillionaire is here, you're buying drinks. But that's the power of this new frontier. One of the most important things in the NASA Authorization Act was a clear and unequivocal commitment that we are going to Mars.
Bravo. Bravo.
That passed the Senate 100 to nothing. It passed the House 435 to nothing. Every Democrat and every Republican are on the same page saying, man will go to Mars, and I'm going to be further and say, the first foot that sets foot on Mars will be an American foot and an American explorer. That's leadership that I think this country needs and values. Restoring America's leadership in space, I think, is incredibly important. Let me note as well, one of the things that both of those pieces of legislation did is they extended the life of the International Space Station. They extended the life of the ISS. The ISS is a resource that we've invested billions of dollars into, that our allies have invested billions of dollars into, that we've seen enormous scientific discoveries. And I'm aware that there's some voices in this town that are pushing for phasing out the ISS in 2025. Well, let me make two things clear. Number one, that proposal is contrary to the plain text of statutes that have passed the United States Congress unanimously with enthusiastic support from Democrats and Republicans and have been signed into law. And that suggestion, I'll tell you this, as long as I am chairman of the Space Subcommittee, we will not be phasing out the ISS as long as there is scientifically usable life and we can continue to extend that asset.
Bravo.
It would be irresponsible not to get the maximum return from that investment and to extend the life of it as long as it is scientifically feasible. Let me say also, we have reason to celebrate. Because at long last, after nearly a year and a half, we once again have a Senate-confirmed administrator of NASA.
Bravo. Bravo.
Jim Bridenstine is a good man. He is a good friend. He was a Navy pilot. He was a Top Gun instructor. He's someone with a background not unlike that of many astronauts that go and risk their lives exploring space. It's unfortunate that Jim's nomination was tied up in partisan wranglings for over a year. I'll tell you, I fought tooth and nail to move Jim forward to confirmation. I was proud to be there when he was sworn in. I think it is not good for NASA not to have a Senate-confirmed administrator in place. NASA needs strong leadership that can go directly to the president, leadership that can go directly to Congress with credibility, with force, with vision. And I am confident that Jim leading NASA is going to continue on the path we've seen, which is over recent years, over recent decades, we've seen an incredible proliferation of public-private cooperation when it comes to space. Look, if we are going to go to Mars, and we are going to go to Mars, nobody thinks that is going to be driven solely by public funds from the taxpayers. That endeavor is far too enormous, given the constraints of modern budget reality. What we've seen, however, is the ability to use those federal funds, and NASA is right now funded at its highest levels. Use those federal funds in turn to incentivize and leverage many levels more of private funds to devote the billions of dollars necessary to break these new frontiers. That cooperation has been incredibly potent and has allowed so many different institutions to spring up and to invest. That is incredibly positive, and one of the things I'm encouraged about Jim's leadership is I'm confident that Jim is committed to keeping NASA's core focus on space exploration. NASA was formed to explore space. That should be the focus. To coin a phrase, to boldly go where no man has gone before. That's what NASA is there for. And that's what NASA should be leading. You know, over the past year, I've held a series of hearings on the new frontier, on the challenges, on the impediments to additional private sector investment in space exploration, on the impediments to getting to Mars. They're going to be significant, technological and otherwise, they're going to be significant. But my staff is right now continuing to work on new legislation, a second iteration of the Commercial Space Launch Bill, and a second, broader NASA authorization bill. We are working with a great many of the people here, a great many of the players throughout space, both in the government sector and in the private sector, drawing on your expertise, drawing on your knowledge. I don't think in the coming days and weeks we're suddenly going to have an outburst of bipartisan love and kumbaya in Washington. I think that is not a prediction out on a limb to say we'll continue to have partisan battles between now and election day. But what I think is also right to say is even in spite of those battles, we will continue to have bipartisan cooperation when it comes to space. Because whatever one thinks about tax policy or whatever one thinks about health care policy or other political matters, every one of us has had the experience of looking up at the sky and wondering.
All right. Thank you, sir.
None of you would be here if not for that time as a little boy or a little girl that you looked up and imagined. Who else is out there? What else is out there? What does the universe hold? That's what the men and women here are committed to discovering, and I'm committed to doing everything humanly possible to help them. God bless you.
God bless you.